All right. Hey, everybody. So, this is my first live stream. And I thought that since this channel is about storytelling and tabletop role playing, that we would take some time over the next several weeks to talk about how to write and organize and create your own adventures, primarily for D&D, but really for any tabletop role playing game that you want to make. There's a lot of videos online that cover tips and tricks and hacks and all kinds of stuff that talks about how you should or shouldn't be putting your adventures together and how to do them fast and how to manipulate your players and how to you know, come up with all kinds of surprising plot hooks. But for all the mechanics and hacks out there, the process is actually pretty simple, and nobody, at least nobody that I have found, really walks you through the process in its entirety from start to finish, doing this in real time. They give you snippets and sound bites and kind of expect you to fill in all the blanks between their bullet points on your own. So I write full time, not D&D obviously, but I'm a full time writer, and I've been playing D&D since the '90s. I've been DMing in 5e since 2015, and so I do this all the time. So I thought I would share with you my process of how to create an adventure from scratch, how to keep it organized, so that when you're playing it, you can keep up with it quickly, and how to prepare yourself so that you don't end up flat-footed when things change on you during the game, as they will. So uh, let's go ahead and start off by introducing to you the template that I use. So I use Notion. It's a free application, a free note-taking application online to organize and create all of my home games. So when I'm writing D&D for me to DM, this is what I use, and I will share the link to this template in the comments on this video. I'll pin it up at the top. But effectively, I've created this template that I use over and over again, and it's broken down into a series of table databases that allow me to easily organize and find elements. So, working my way through here, I start with the adventure. This is where I actually put the text of the adventure itself. The encounters, the setbacks, the actual description of the events, and it becomes kind of my working document as we go throughout this process. Um, Next, I have here is the NPCs and monsters, and so when I create an NPC or if I create a unique monster stat block, I'll save that in here. And the nice thing about doing this in Notion is it allows me to hyperlink things between the pages here as well as to other websites. So that means that if I reference a unique monster that I have outlined down here, I can hyperlink it up in the adventure here when it comes up, so that with one click, I can pull up that page very simply and have my full stat block, or have the full details for that NPC. I do the same kind of thing for items down here if I make custom items. Locations, this is usually for me, it's reoccurring locations or locations that have lots of detail associated with them. And then special mechanics. If I'm running a game that I'm using any kind of homebrew rules for, or if there's official content that I don't normally lean into that I might be leaning into in this adventure. So, for example, if I'm playing a gritty campaign of Curse of Strahd, I might want to have special rules about healing and regaining hit points on short or long rests, and as they outline in the DMG. And so I might make a little note to myself here about that special rule, and then include the hyperlink to the DMG, the Dungeon Master's Guide page that references that. And so as I'm building adventures, I'm filling this all in kind of as I go. We're going to be jumping back and forth between these various windows. And Notion works really well for that because, as you can see, I've kind of got this set up as a full page view. But when I open up one of these pages here, it's going to open up as a sidebar. I can change that if I want. I can come up here and change how I look at that. But when I'm building this, I like to use that sidebar because that way, if I'm writing out an adventure section and I make up an NPC or I make up something that needs to be noted later, like an item, I don't have to leave this page. I can just come over here, go to my NPCs, and I can edit the name. Nice and easy, right? So that way I can capture the information very quickly of things that I need to create unique pages for. Now, the adventure section, I don't have any templates created for this because they vary significantly. But for the other areas, I do. So, for example, here with our NPCs and monsters, I have an NPC template, and this focuses a lot on information that I'll need for role playing this character. I use this. I'll use this for pretty much NPC that I make, but I may not fill it all out for each NPC. I'll focus on filling out that information for NPCs that I think the characters are going to interact with quite a lot, or characters that I didn't fill it out for much before, but the party has adopted them, and now they're and now they are now they're intertwined. So for example, I played a Curse of Strahd campaign at one point where the party went to the old bone grinder, the windmill in there, and they saved the two kids that were there. And one of the little boys' name is Freak, and they love Freak. They adopted Freak, and to the point where Freak not only accompanied them through the rest of the adventure, when those characters continued on after Curse of Strahd, Freak came with them. And so, even though he gets like 2 lines of text as a description in that campaign setting, I built out a full NPC template for him so that I would know how to role play him going forward in developing his character. If I'm building a unique monster, and I use the term monster here loosely, this can be anything that's a unique stat block. Then I can use the template here, and that is set up with all of the fillable components of a regular D&D stat block. So I can just go in and change that data there and have a nice, neat, recognizable format. Likewise, I've got templates for items, locations, for settlements, wilderness, dungeon, that kind of thing, and so on. And so by using this template and having these set up, it cuts down on my work because I don't have to recreate these pages every single time. I just open up a new, I open up a new file here or open up a new page, and I select the appropriate template, get BC here, and it will take a minute, but it'll auto-populate with all the information that I've built out in this template here that I can go through and edit as needed. So, if we're writing an adventure that I know we need a quest giver for, then, I'll put their name up here, and then I can fill that out as we go. Likewise, for each of these pages, we can give associated metadata. So for adventure, there's stages that we cover in the adventure arc here. And it's our exposition, our rising action, climax, falling action, and resolution. And those follow what was called Freytag's pyramid. And so essentially, this is the arc that all plots take, where your exposition is where your characters are learning about the adventure, they're hitting the inciting incident, the thing that throws them into that adventure. The rising action is the majority of your adventure. This is where they're going through their trials and challenges and having to overcome puzzles and fight bad guys and explore the environment and what have you. The climax, this is your big bad encounter. This is where it's the make or break moment. Will they win or lose? Will they succeed or fail? And then in a D&D adventure, at least, and a lot of tabletop role-playing game adventures, falling action, and that should be resolution, not exposition. But I'll update that in the template. But falling action and resolution are kind of summed up in the last chapter. That's where we talk about what happens at the end of the adventure, whether the characters win or lose. And so when I'm building out these adventures, I'll break each one of these sections down into one of those stages so that I know about where it's falling in the story and what it's meant to achieve. Likewise, for monsters and NPCs, they each fill a role in the campaign. And so I can mark those here, patrons or quest givers. Pointers give clues and keep the characters in the right direction. Allies are allies, enemies are enemies. Villains I use for the big bad. And then monsters are just there to denote differentiation between a sentient humanoid creature, your typical NPC, or something else. Items we're all pretty familiar. If you play D&D, you're familiar with the various types of items out there, specifically like Wondrous. The only thing I add to that list is MacGuffin, and that's because we may have adventures that focus around a particular item, a unique item, something the characters need to find. And so that's your MacGuffin in a storytelling sense. Examples are, the Goblet of Fire is a MacGuffin. The Maltese Falcon is a MacGuffin. They're a physical item that is central to the story of the plot. Locations, primarily I'll break them down into settlement, dungeon, or wilderness as my 3 types of locations. If it's a wilderness, then I'll add a subtag to this as well. And that's really just to denote, for my edification on the environment, because some creatures do get different advantages in different environments. And of course, being somebody who likes to play Rangers when I actually get to play, be a player, favorite terrain is an important thing to be aware of. Yeah, I'm a Ranger man. And then special mechanics. This is so variable that I'll be honest with you, I don't use much in the way of templates here or tags. Really, that URL ends up becoming the most useful bit here. But anyway, this is my this is my notebook, if you will, for how I organize the pieces and parts of my adventures. And we're going to be working in this here again. I'll share the link to this particular template, and it's free. You can take the template, copy it into your Notion, and use it over and over and over again to fill out your adventures if you find this useful. And so, to that end, let's build an adventure together, starting from absolute scratch. If you are building an adventure as part of an ongoing campaign, then you have some background with your characters and what's happened, and that you can draw on, that you can build off of. And that's frequently very helpful in the brainstorming process, but we're kind of building this from nothing, like you might if you were starting a campaign from absolute zero. And so there's a couple ways you can go about getting ideas. I am a big fan of free writing, where you get a little spark of something. You think, oh, I'd really love to run an adventure where the big bad is a beholder, or I would really love to run an adventure that's all about curing a plague. You get that little kernel of something. In fiction writing, we would call that a what if kind of scenario. What if a plague, ravaged through Neverwinter that caused people's magic to misfire? And yes, I am ripping off the spell plague there. But anyway, what if such and such happened? What if, what if the agricultural community outside of Neverwinter was invaded and occupied by orcs, and they laid siege to the city? What would happen? So you start with whatever that you can start with whatever that what if kernel is, and sit down and free write your way through it. Dumping all of your thoughts, all the thoughts you already have about that, and then chasing down ideas as they occur to you. That's my preferred method of doing it. I really prefer to take a piece of paper and sit down and physically write that out. I find that I think best with pen and paper, writing that out to myself. And you'll be surprised what kind of ideas and inspiration comes from that. So you do that, You let that sit for a minute, and then come back. You pick out the ideas that you like, and then you start crafting your adventure around that, knowing that those are going to shift and change as you go. That's my preferred method of doing this. Now, that being said, what if you want to write an adventure and you just have no freaking clue where to start? Well, we're going to approach this just like that. We're going to assume that we are coming to this as a blank slate. We are a newborn DM who's plumped down, who's got to come up with an adventure and has absolutely no idea what it should be about. Thankfully, the DMG can come to our aid on this. Now, all this is in the physical DMG. It's easier for me to show this on D&D Beyond, so I'm going to do that here. But in the Dungeon Master's Guide, you can go to the Dungeons section here, and that has a whole bunch of tables to help you kind of generate ideas for a dungeon. Now, none of these are binding. They're designed to help you out and come up with ideas that might spark your creativity. And I recommend that if you're building your first adventure, you start with a dungeon and not, I'll use dungeon in a loose term here, but you start with a finite area, right? Your traditional dungeon, this underground, building, of mortared stone with passages and chambers and traps and what have you. While it's kind of ubiquitous and it may feel initially like, there's so much of those out there and it feels uncreative and yada, yada, yada. It's a really good place to start because it gives you finite decision points. Starting with something that's like an adventure where they're exploring the wilderness or a sandbox kind of world can be really fun and really, really rewarding. But those infinite options that come with that can also be very paralyzing if you don't already have an idea to build off of. And so for this first one, I think let's go ahead and let's start by building an adventure that focuses in and around a dungeon. And then for later, after we've spent a couple weeks on this and we've really made it, look good and we've taken our time and I've explained my whole process to you and we're going to do this all over again, then we can do something a little more complicated, a little more sandboxy like a wilderness. So starting from scratch, let's use these tables here to come up with some ideas. And so this is gaming, so let's roll some dice, right? What would be the point if we didn't get to throw dice? I mean, does the story even matter so long as you get to throw dice? Some would say no. I would say the story is still more important, but throwing dice is fun. Okay, so our tables here are called for T100. So let's give that a roll. Okay, that's a 49. So what do we got? That means, in a glacier. Well, that immediately gives us some context, for this dungeon. So let's make a note. Our dungeon is going to take place in a glacier. Cool. And we'll translate all this into Notion once we kind of have this all down. All right, so we did not roll in an exotic location, so we don't need to roll that. So let's come down, let's kind of figure out who made this dungeon initially, at least. All right, so this calls for a D20. Let's give it a shot. That's a 9. Okay, elves, including drow. Okay. Could already see some like winter Eladrin kind of deal going on there in a glacier. Let's see. Including drow. Sweet. Okay, so we didn't get cult or religious group, and we didn't get humanoid, so we can skip the NPC and cult table there and get right down to our dungeon purpose. All right, so dungeon purpose, D20 here. What was the whole point? Why did they do this? Oh, it was a mine. Okay. So elves build a mine in a glacier. Cool. Now let's bear in mind for a moment that this is giving us information about the origins of this dungeon. It does not in any way speak to what is necessarily currently going on in this dungeon. So, one, if you were to kind of get on this table here and roll and go, oh, I really don't, I don't really like what that came up with. I don't really have a lot of ideas for what we might do with that. Well, two things. One, you can re-roll. Sometimes, I'll find that rolling on these tables don't tell me what I like. They don't show me what I like. They show me what I now know I don't want to do. So I'll roll and I'll roll again until something goes, oh, you know what? That sounds pretty good. But two, this is just history. This is just kind of giving us flavor of the original, our original dungeon here to kind of fill out and help guide us as we navigate this process going on here. So let's now get down into our dungeon history. What's something that has happened in this dungeon here? All right, another 20. That's a 4. Abandoned due to plague. Okay, all right. Abandoned due to plague. A lot of plague references in this stream already. I wonder what I'm putting out in the universe. Anyway, not going to think too hard about that. Dungeon inhabitants. Dungeon ecology. Yeah, so we'll have to kind of figure out who's there now, what those factions are, what they want, what the ecology is. But we've got a starting place for, what the thing is that we have. Where is this going to take place? And even that little bit of, that little kernel of information can be enough to start kicking off what's, what will be the idea of just an outstanding adventure. So our next step here is to actually do some real brainstorming to kind of think through this. Because if you were to just take this and sit down and go, okay, time to start writing the adventure, most people will find that to be incredibly paralyzing. And that's because if you have infinite options, that's the same thing as having no options. If you go in literally any direction, well, how do you pick one? So we're going to spend some time brainstorming. Now, like I said, I prefer to do this on paper, but for the sake of you guys getting to watch me and go through this process together, we're going to do this on the computer here. And so in Notion, I can pull up all kinds of different pages and add the elements by hitting that /. And I'm going to do that. I'm going to write page, and that's just going to open up a brand new page for me here, which will be embedded in our previous document. So I'm going to say brainstorming. Cool. And that's just going to be a blank page. And if I, want to click out of this and go back to the next one, I can just go back up to the top here to our YouTube stream adventure, and that page will be all the way down here. Well, brainstorming is the first thing. I don't want it all the way down there. I think I want it just up here underneath our maddeningly incorrect graphic. Gosh, I can't believe I missed that. Anyway, so let's go back to our brainstorming page and let's think through this. So I find brainstorming works best when you talk to yourself on the page. If there is, well, so think about it this way. Sometimes brainstorming is like having a hard conversation with yourself. Like, have you ever been in a situation where you needed to tell you need to be a good friend. You need to tell a friend something that might be hard for them to hear. I'm not saying like an argument, but something that they need to know that may not be the most comfortable of situations, the most comfortable of conversations. Think about how you just dive. How do you dive into that? Um, Everybody's a little different. I found that I tend to open up with the words "okay, so," and so I'll sit a friend down. Okay, so here's the deal. Well, and when I realized that that's kind of how I throw myself into the cold water of a hard conversation, and that brainstorming felt very much the same way for me. I find that if I just start typing and I start off with those kinds of words, my brain gets rolling. It gets into the difficulty of this. It lets me throw myself into the cold water of brainstorming and generating new ideas. So let's just start with what we know. So okay, you know, here's the deal, and don't worry about your spelling or your typing as you go through this. This is supposed to be fast, a little bit furious. We've got glacier that holds an abandoned mine once built by elves, drow, ladrin, but has since been evacuated due to plague. Okay, so we've got a glacier, we've got an abandoned mine, we've got, we know that it was originally constructed by some kind of elves, drow, ladrin, you know, moon, high, wood, who knows, astral, could be, and that they left it because of plague. Okay, so that sparks a couple questions. What were they mining? I'll ask myself. Well, it would have to be something special, something important and rare, because, well, there are many mines in a glacier. Or, if this is if this is a Spelljammer campaign, maybe they were just mining ice. Maybe they need water for Spelljammers. Who knows? And yes, I am a professional writer that frequently mistypes and misspells words. You'll find that that is common in my profession. Anyway, so they were just, so maybe they were just mining ice. I don't really want to make this a Spelljammer campaign, so I'm going to kind of put that idea to the side. Not that I have anything against Spelljammer. I'm currently running a Spelljammer campaign, but let's keep this a little more rooted in something that is perhaps a little less niche for the moment. Okay, so we know they were mining something very rare. Cool. And we'll have to figure out what that is. So that's, a possible MacGuffin for this if we decide that the purpose of this adventure is to go reclaim those resources. And so, they were mining something very rare, so maybe, let's say, MacGuffin. Okay, well, what else do we know? Well, we know they left due to plague, so what kind of plague drove them out? Is it still present? Could it pose a hazard? So this could prove to be an interesting special mechanic as we send adventurers down there. Do they have to avoid catching this plague themselves? And if they do, what are the effects of this plague? How can it be cured? I personally find the idea of disease in D&D specifically very interesting because there are so many ways to be instantly cured of a disease, um, that there has to be a reason that somebody would remain infected. And so either that's a magical reason, for example, the disease can't be treated by cure wound. I mean, not cure wounds, lesser restoration, or lay on hands, because theoretically, even if you have a town full of people who have caught this disease, if they live long enough, the clerics there and the paladins there could be working their way through healing people. Um, so either it has to be something that is resistant to magical curing, or it has to require curing by a spell that has an expensive material component, meaning that it's an economic barrier to curing the disease. Or it has to advance so rapidly that the healers that are available just can't keep up with it. Which, depending on the kind of campaign you want to play, there's pros and cons to each one of those. High magic campaigns might benefit from a spell that, or from a plague that's spell resistant. Um, Campaigns that are more about class struggles and socioeconomic positions that have, clear social hierarchies, kings and paupers and what have you. That might, lend itself well to a disease that requires a specific spell with a expensive material component that most people just can't afford. Or if you want something a little grittier, something that's a little more grimdark, maybe, going with a disease that just spreads too fast to stay on top of. And in either case, such a disease might be laying dormant in our glacial mine, cold preserves, right? So those are all things we might want to think about if we want to use that plague element. That being said, maybe we don't. Maybe that's not something we want to put our characters through at the moment. And so so that's just the backstory. But if we had a plague that ravaged its way through an active mine, forcing it to be abandoned, well, there'd be some things left behind. Disease isn't necessarily like, this wouldn't be an instant catastrophe. It wouldn't be like the mine was flooding and everybody had to drop what they were doing and ran out, but they still wouldn't stick around. So there would be stuff that's left behind. So what things would be left behind? So we might get equipment that's left there, materials, this special ore, if it's an ore. Maybe it's a special ice that they're mining. Ooh, special ice, unique ice was mined there. But they could have left this material behind. Sorry, my brain's kind of firing on that special ice. Let's follow that thought process. Let's follow that tangent. Immediately, I kind of jumped to the idea of cold iron. If you read like old fairy tales about the Fae in particular, they talk about the Fae being vulnerable, not just to iron, but specifically cold iron. And the story is cold iron is any iron that's been shaped without a furnace. So it's pounded into shape as opposed to heated and then formed. And so that's that was it was a specific way of manufacturing iron tools and iron weapons. It was that specific process that made Faye vulnerable to it, and then that's kind of evolved through sort of the you know more modern literature on this and modern retellings. It's really just been iron, all iron in some versions. But we could build off of the idea of cold iron, and we could say that perhaps cold iron requires a unique kind of ice, or maybe it is a unique kind of ice in and of itself. Um, it's not truly iron ore as we think about it. Maybe it is a special kind of magic ice or super cooled ice that is especially resilient. It's crystallized, and then after it's been worked in the forge, maybe or worked in a smith's shop. Uh, Maybe it no longer melts after that, allowing weapons and armament and other tools to be crafted from it. And if this was originally built by elves who do have that link to the Feywild, if we're building on that potentially, well, uh, those maybe those elves are having to defend themselves against the Fae. Maybe this particular group of elves were in contest with the Fae. Um, were were either hostile to, or were being hunted by, or oppressed by, or in conflict with the Fae. Um, so whether or not we chase that down, it's an interesting. It's at least an interesting thing to note down to. We might want to come back to that later. And so let's get here. So unique isis mind. What if they mind? We're going to say cooled iron here. Cold iron is not ore. It's not metal ore. We know it, but rather a unique, magically fused kind of black ice that when that can be used to craft weapons and armor, does not melt, except maybe in extreme heat. That's a possibility. These weapons are effective against Fey creatures. Okay. So we kind of have an item here that grows out of this. So maybe the purpose of this, maybe this is a MacGuffin. I mean, maybe this is our characters are sent in to recover this, or they discover this potentially lucrative bit of bit of information where they can find this treasure here. Um, I personally would lean towards something along the lines of them being sent in for one, a monetary reward, and then two, um, some kind of altruistic benefit that can come out of this. Um, and I say that because your players are going to have a variety of motivations themselves. Um, you know, uh, for example, I have one of my current campaigns. It's been going on for we're in our fourth year at this point. But I've got a character who's a paladin, and he plays as a very classic paladin. He's about doing good, and he's about justice, and he's about doing the right thing. I have another character who's a bard who plays very much the chaotic chaos agent bard, and they both have very different motivations. And as players, they have to come up with reasons why their characters with these unique motivations would work towards a common goal. And that can be difficult when you don't give um, your adventures a variety of of motivations that your characters, that your players can get behind. And so, in this adventure, I really kind of like the idea of making this a good old fashioned MacGuffin hunt to start here, like, to find you know, lost deposit of cold iron. So let's run with that. So, what if this was a good old fashioned MacGuffin hunt? Yeehaw. Um, the players are tasked with recovering the only known deposit of cold iron. And now that's a thing. It's getting all caps in my mind. Only in the region. What is it? There's a reward in coin, and the patron / community needs this to craft weapons to defend themselves, or to craft weapons, maybe armor to defend themselves, which may feel a little dark in the beginning if we talk about them fighting against Fae, but there's a lot of Fae creatures. I mean, hags are Fae creatures. There's plenty of evil Fae, especially if we lean into the whole unseelie court deal. But that's perhaps getting into a little bit of the weeds here. But this does suggest something to us, that if we want them to have that altruistic motivation, then it means that this community needs this for something that is ultimately positive. And so, yep, coin's a great motivation. It's always good to reward your players with some coins, especially if you make treasure matter in your adventure. More on that in some of my shorts, which feels so weird to say. Maybe just because I grew up in the era when Eat My Shorts was on Nickelodeon. But anyway, so YouTube Shorts. Yeah. So making that treasure and that coin matter, and so rewarding with that coin is useful. But then also that altruistic need means that there's some impending threat to our quest giver, i.e., our patron, and the community that patron represents. So that lends itself to another question. What's the threat that the patron, and we're just going to use patron as shorthand for patron / the community, is facing? Is this attack? Is this a curse? Ooh. Well, so what if the village made a pact with a coven of hags? We'll say 100 years ago. We're just going to pull a number out. Or we can or you can do this. Pro tip: is you're kind of moving through this, if you realize you need a name or a figure or something that you just don't know, and your brain can't work until you kind of get past that point of the sentence, you can use there's an editor's notation It's TK. It stands for to come. And yes, I know, come doesn't start with a K, it starts with a C. But TK is easier to spot in text. It's also easier to control find. But you could say, or TK years, and that means that a number of years to come, and so that that when you're going back through your text, you can do a control find of TK, and it'll pop up all the places where like, oh yeah, I need to give that person a name, and I need to name that village, and I need to figure out how long ago that was, and that kind of stuff. And so it allows you to kind of type in those two letters and just keep your thought process rolling. So back to that thought process. So what if the village made a pact with the Coven of Hags 100 years ago? So TK years ago. Um, and and payment is coming due. Ooh, I like that because now, what if? Because then, what if that? It's a question. Yeah, okay. What if that payment, is the cold iron? Only the characters don't know it's needed to pay the hags. They think it's needed to defend against them. See, this is starting to lend itself to a twist. Twist in the resolution or toward the resolution of the adventure, or perhaps building to the true climax of the adventure. As we'll talk about, that there are places where you may insert false climaxes, which is to say, a point where the players have fought what they think is the big bad. They've had that, what they think is the climactic encounter. And lo and behold, they have won, they've gotten their spoils, and they come back to turn it in, and everything's supposed to be hunky-dory, only to find out that there's information they didn't know, that there is a twist, that they've now walked into the real situation here. So what if that is that the players get hired to go recover this cold iron in this dungeon. They go through the dungeon. They face all the trials and challenges there, and whatever's moved in the dungeon in the players or in the absence of the elves. They collect the cold iron. They come back and they're all amped up to give this back to the community so they can defend themselves against the hags. And then they find out that no, really, it's the village intends to pay the hags off with this cold iron that they promised to recover. And now the characters have a choice. They can go along with this plan and be a party to whatever evil these hags spread on the world with this material it's so good at killing Fae. Or they have to convince the town to rise up and fight the hags. And then what are the consequences to the town of them breaking their pact? And so we can end up with a cool climactic end to this adventure that is really has a lot of elements of both combat and role playing in there, and has a lot of different pieces and parts that move that and conflicting objectives. And those conflicting objectives make really tense moments in your story because your players are all working towards the same goal of success, of winning, right? Of completing the encounter there, but they have different visions on how that occurs, which creates tension, positive tension at the table, positive conflict. So not between the players themselves, but between the characters and their decisions that they make, and then with the other NPCs in the game. So, yeah, I like this idea. I like this idea of the cold iron MacGuffin and an ancient deal with the hags. All right, so at this point in my process, I might kind of summarize this to myself, so I have a block of text to come back to. And in my notebook, I would take a highlighter out and highlight that section here. We're just going to type it out, and then we may still highlight it. So, okay. So what we have so far, the characters are hired by a community leader. It's our patron. We cover the only deposit of cold iron. It's lost in a glacial mine, once ravaged by disease. The community needs it to save themselves from the foretold coming. There's one of that coming of the TK Hag Coven name, a coven of hags, led to believe the village plans to fight the powerful Fae. They recover the cold iron, but when they return, discover the village tends to use the cold iron to pay off the coven, thus completing their ancient pact. The party must decide whether to support empowering the coven with powerful Fae slaying cold iron, or convince the community to fight back, knowing there will be consequences to the village breaking their bargain with the coven. Cool. All right, so that's kind of our summary of what we've got here so far, and look at that. I mean, after a few paragraphs, just kind of chatting this out, we've got a little bit of a plot here, at least enough to start running with. We've still got a couple things that hang out in this regard. So, for example, whether or not that plague still affects the mine. I think it'd be kind of cool if it did in patches, maybe, or if the creatures that have moved in there were affected by their adaptations to the plague. For example, and we won't know what kind of creatures to populate this with until we decide what level adventure to make this. But if, for example, we had a white dragon, move in there to lair as our big bad, after spending, 100 years or so in this, this plague-ridden plague-ridden mine, they might become warped themselves by it. They might become mutated or infected or changed in some way by this magical disease. And so it's certainly something to play with here. But for the moment, we've got enough to get started. And so we're going to go ahead and highlight that bad boy so we're able to come up with here. And our brainstorming is complete. So If this was, in paper in a notebook, I like to have the notebook kind of laid out to my side here while I go back to my document and work on this. Um, but in this case, we're going to copy it and have it someplace accessible. So we're going to come back over here. And I think we're going to just toss that in the comments here so that we have our little story summary so far. If you think in bullet points, there's nothing wrong with brainstorming up in the comment section here. I like to have it in a separate document so I can be messy and spread around with it and kind of follow tangents and what have you, like we did. And very rarely does it come together quite that quickly. In my brainstorming, it usually sprawls over several pages. And then keep my main document clean here, which is kind of a summary. All right. Well, so we're about an hour into this, so I think we're going to go ahead and close the stream here. But this is exciting. We've gotten through the first big hurdle of writing an adventure. That's coming up with the first idea of our plot. And so next time we get into our stream, we'll take that little summary and we will start building out the elements of our adventure, and then filling in our NPCs and items and what have you. For example, we already know that we've got our community leader, who is our patron here, and we can give them a name next time. We know that we've got cold iron, is something we got to figure out what it does. And then we've got the plague that we need to figure out. Oh, and cold iron is our MacGuffin, so let's put that there. All right. Cool. So with that, thank you guys so much for joining me. Again, I'm RJ Kerr, and if you've enjoyed this video, you want to check out the next live stream or check out some of my other videos here, please like and subscribe to the channel. It's the easiest way to support me. And in either case, check out the link to this adventure template, or the blank version of this adventure template, the one that you can fill in that won't affect our ongoing adventure here. For Notion, I'll put that into the comments below this video, and you can access it and start building your own adventures right away. All right. Well, thanks, everybody, and I look forward to seeing you next time on my channel. Talk to you then.